Hello, this is your host, Todd Lewis of the Praise of Folly podcast. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe and hit the notification bell. Don't forget to check out my locals, subscribe to locals. You can support me directly at locals, and you can also see, you'll get automatic email updates whenever I have a new show or when I make a guest appearance on another show and I upload it there. So also, since I'm not profiting off of the application of social technique to my audience via advertising, consider going over to locals. So about 2 weeks ago, I did a video entitled, back it up real quick. Also, at around the 45 minute mark, I'll read the chat. Super chats will be read first, and then other chats will be read if time permits. About 2 weeks ago, I did a stream on the Dissident Right. Was it Gonzalez and the Prudentialist had done some talking about the state of the alt-right as it currently is. And I wrote about what I thought about that. And I feel like it was time to kind of visit this again because in a lot of regards, it's always a nice way to pad out episodes like, well, why I'm not X or whatever. Now, obviously, with the libertarians and the left, that was pretty obvious. I think that the DR deserves a slightly different treatment because it's not so much that I oppose them or disagree with them to the same degree that I do with the left and libertarians, but nonetheless, there are still disagreements. And then I'll use this as an excuse as well to sort of unpack a little bit of what my own position is. So while we're here, we've got Oropos, Minoan, and Vingul. Thanks for showing up, guys. So let's begin by discussing the big three in the Dissident Right. The Dissident Right can be divided into three broad categories: Ethno-Nationalism, the Manosphere, and NRX. So I'll begin with what I found useful or insightful from these groups, and then move on to a criticism that I have of these groups, and then move on to, well, what am I? And what do I think the DR is for? So the Ethno-Nationalists. So the thing that I remember from them learning was that, there are group dynamics. So one thing the libertarians will teach you is that there's individual choice dynamics. But then they say that's the only thing that exists, and that's where they make a mistake. Then there's group dynamics. The ethno-nationalists look at the ethnic component. The manosphere looks at the gender, sex component. And then the left and certain, I guess you could say, post-left thinkers have this idea of a broad, expansive forces of history kind of thing. Marx, obviously, is the leftist version, but we have a postmodern philosopher like Baudrillard. We have, I don't know what you call Ellul. And that's how I sort of see incentives and decision-making processes occurring. So the ethno-nationalists pushed back against the idea that we're all just these fungible last men at the end of history. And that we do have, ethnicities. And, all the other racial groups are allowed to do that except white people. And that was the obvious hypocrisy they were pointing out. And then, so I think that was a useful on their part. I remember that back in the day when there was the Richard Spencer, Colin Liddell, and Wiki podcast, they had a lot of interesting people. I heard about Kerry Bolton from them, and I'm pretty sure I heard about Anthony Sutton from Kerry Bolton. And so that whole rabbit trail side quest was all thanks to the Richard Spencer Alt-Right podcast, the original podcast. So, I mean, there's a lot of interesting content there that, I learned. The ethno-nationalists are also good for this historiographical pushback on the anti-Western narratives. So that's the positive for them. The positive for the Manosphere is I believe that they correctly diagnose the problem of the relationship between the sexes, which is gynocentrism, which is a society that's ordered, which is a society that's based on misandry, ordered for the benefit of women against men. Well, they're right in part. I mean, if we telescope this out to the machine, and we might get to this a little bit later in the stream, there's deeper forces at work. But at a sort of like on the boots on the ground level, it's a very good description of all of these, and their historiographical work with the idea of chivalry, and courtly love, going back to 12th century France, has also been insightful and informative, and giving us the sort of historical path to how we got here. NRX, pretty much can't stand it. I got nothing good to say about NRX. So now we'll talk about where I think these guys go wrong. The problem is the ethno-nationalists don't have a solution to anything, right? They talk about the idea of an ethno-state, but they do it in a way that's really cartoonish and LARPy, and so it's never going to actually take off. Now, could something like that actually happen? Absolutely. In South Africa, we have Orania, an all-white city. It's been around since 1991. Now, remember, this is South Africa under the ANC, not friendly to white Afrikaners. And yet they somehow managed to pull this off. But the alt-right still hasn't been able to form an IRL community. I mean, heck, the libertarians did this. We have the Free State Project and the North American Readout. It's ridiculous. They can't even get to that level, which is actually achievable. I mean, it could be done. Now, a broader, reclamation, a reconquista of North America, well, that's a lot less likely to happen. So there's that, and their level of analysis is too low of a resolution, right? They're like, well, it's all ethnic. That's the one thing that if you understand, everything else makes sense. Well, no. I mean, first of all, it's implicitly materialistic. All of the sort of higher philosophical and theological claims are waved away. But even at the level of the material, I would argue the most important force in our lives is technique, as Jacques Ellul describes in his On Technique. So again, even at a material level, it's too low of a resolution. So it has limits as far as its applicability in order to move us to a new state. And going back to my video 2 weeks ago on the state of the alt-right, there is no unifying principle. Well, in fact, going back to my appearance on Lamster with Lambda, there's nothing like a Marx that unites all the right in this way of thinking, in the way that the left has. And despite the infighting on the left, which is every bit as vicious as on the right, they're able to get things done, partly because they have a common thing they can rally around that just doesn't really exist for the dissident right, and more specifically the ethno-nationalists. And within the ethno-nationalists, we also have neo-pagans, atheists, people who are Vedic tradition. Then you got the Bronze Age. Well, actually, that's more NRX. We'll get to that later. And it's a total contradictory mess. I mean, like these belief systems that they have. Now, there was a time when there was a strong Orthodox presence with Matthew Perry and Matthew Heimbach, but since they crashed and burned, that presence really isn't there anymore. So what I would say then, again, to end the ethno-nationalists, is their level of analysis is too low level of a resolution. They don't have any meaningful plan to even build an Orania, which has been done under harsher conditions in South Africa by Afrikaners. And then also the infighting amongst themselves, neo-pagans, atheists, and all the other personality cults, and then infighting within the dissident right as a whole, fighting with the Manosphere and Rushvi back in the day. It's fundamentally limited as a unit, as a movement. The use that it had was when it was producing highbrow content, which, the original alt-right blog and then Radix did for a while. Countercurrent still does. And then, but TRS kind of Countercurrents got drowned out by TRS when they just went, full, irony bro. And it just blew up the whole movement. So it's really a husk of what it used to be. And I think its best days are behind it as far as content that it was able to generate. Now we got the Manosphere. The problem that I have with the Manosphere is they're basically just a bunch of libertarian futurists. The thing that I always struck me about them was they're always pro capitalist, pro grifting, pro market, and it's like, bro, do you know how society what the efficient cause was that supplanted men with women? The market. Yeah, the market. It's literally an absurd oxymoron that they're like pro-market and like, men's rights. So why did women go into the workforce? Well, Aaron Russo, the director, talked to David Rockefeller, and he said, we wanted to basically, have wages, because you double the workforce, you have wages, and then double tax revenue. Done. And then, of course, another implicit reason is that by putting women in the workforce, you can derail unionization efforts, which is why now we have all-time low unionization. Now, of course, men haven't really been replaced by women. They've been replaced by machines which prop up women, and women are sort of like the commissars of this system. But the problem is this is the most absurd mismatch I've really seen in a long time. It's about as absurd as being an open borders Marxist. So it's such a fundamental contradiction that it just makes the Manosphere completely useless as a movement, even though it does generate intellectual content that I think some of which is useful. Again, I think a lot of the best days are behind them. A lot of the guys either just dropped out like Barbar, or they got, purged in the Great Purge after 2017. People like TFM, people like Sandman. Thinking Ape is still around, but he's kind of branched out, and he's no longer narrowly just Manosphere. He's also philosopher, other things, current events. He's kind of like rebranded without completely giving up his original position. And this, grifting and radical individualism. I mean, a good example of this is Aaron Clarey. This is just useless. This doesn't serve any purpose. This doesn't help move us to some better end state. Because really what we're talking about when you have like these libertarian, merchant-minded futurists, what is this? Well, this is basically the expression of a deracinated individual living in a synthetic environment within the simulacra. He's just regurgitating. He's just speaking from a completely unnatural condition. That's really what the Manosphere is. The other thing is, if we go back to the futurist element, machines replaced men. I mean, again, if you're going to say, hey, we want to empower men, we want to have, whatever kind of patriarchy you want. Oh, dude, read Dune, right? The Butlerian Jihad. The machines replaced the men. And so again, this and the machines then, the women then are the commissars for the machines. It's complete nonsense. Like the only way for the Manosphere to actually, make sense would be as if they were kind of like, Uncle Ted, go back to nature, in which case, the material conditions would necessarily lead to a male-dominated society. But they don't go the Uncle Ted route. So there's that. Now, NRX. Oh boy, what to say. It's a pretentious mess of jargon and dribble. They read authors such as Carlyle and don't have a wit to understand what the man had to say. For example, I never heard sincerity come up at all in any of the talks by NRX people. And sincerity is the quality that defines a hero. And On Hero Worship is one of Carlyle's most famous works. It's like you're just dropping Carlyle's name, but you've never read him. Also, Carlyle uses the simulacrum, which has, I think, is a prototypical use that would later become used by Baudrillard. So there's a lot of complex ideas that he has that, like, the NRX just never got to. They kind of like weave a web of impenetrable jargon, the cathedral and all of this other dribble. And then what ends up happening is you try to study it. It's not like scholasticism where the jargon actually means something. And you could argue in theory that, well, you kind of need to have this jargon to express this unique thought. Okay, fair enough. I use a lot of jargon too, and it's technical, but it's clearly and concisely defined, and it helps advance the discussion. Whereas all the NRX jargon does is obfuscate. They're ridiculous gatekeeping against Protestants. They're ridiculous gatekeeping against even normie conservatives that just scares people. I mean, if your goal is to create the smallest, most isolated movement of like, neckbeard computer programmers, then sure. How is that going to help? Furthermore, they're basically just libertarians. Moldbug says he wants to have a corporation run the country. Well, that's kind of how it works already. Global corporations are running America. And as I said in my video with Jevons paradox and energy levels of consumption, the material conditions now under the simulacra and the machine are such that the best maintenance of the status quo is not any sort of right-wing conservative traditional values. Those get in the way. The best way to preserve the machine is to get everybody codependent on the machine. Whether that means, compromising their immune system with, an offer you can't refuse, or whether it's, getting people addicted to delinquent sexual lifestyles that they have to have a constant supply of antibiotics and other, inelastic demand for certain goods. Well, now they're just completely codependent. They can't live without it. NRX is talking about technique. The system that we live in is Baudrillard's simulacra and Ellul's technique. None of these people have the wit to understand that. And they're talking about the system, the machine, the GAE, as if they know what they're talking about. They don't. They get history wrong repeatedly. One of my earlier videos, I mentioned how, I think it was actually Where's the Alt-Right 2 weeks ago, how Moldbug mangles his understanding of Calvinism. So, and furthermore, this sort of like woo-woo mysticism that they like to use with their jargon, we see this also with the trad cats and the ortho bros who fall in that umbrella. It's a way to sound important and try to sound like you're saying something when you're not. So it's just a joke. It's just to throw Carlyle back at them, they reek of insincerity. So then the question is, well, okay, what is actually the point or good of the alt-right? And then where do I stand in relation to it? I would say that the Ethno-Nationalists and the Manosphere, at their best, were able to produce lots of new ideas and bring to light obscure thinkers and old ideas that we would just never have known. Like if it weren't for the original alt-right podcast with Richard Spencer, I wouldn't know about Kerry Bolton. I probably wouldn't know about Anthony Sutton. There's a lot of things I wouldn't know about. Same with the Manosphere. So again, that's all good. But as I've said, they all have these delinquent personality types, moral failings, hedonism. The Manosphere is replete with, hedonism. The Ethno-Nationalists are replete with infighting. And the NRX is just, Maya at this point. It's just smoke, just impenetrable Maya. So, but what it has now is we've seen a sort of further iteration of the DR, and I'm sort of underneath the penumbra of this with like the people that I hang out with and talk to, like Nathan C.J. Hood, like the Prudentialists, like Academic Agent, like Morgoth's Review, and others, Red Hawk. And so the idea then is we have this new state now, which seems to be a lot less spurgy, a lot less infighting. In fact, what's surprising to me is how little infighting there is right now. There's still some. I mean, you'll still see like third positionist types like Keith Woods get attacked all the time. Now, maybe there's some drama that I don't know, but Keith Woods seems to mind his own business, so I don't really understand all this. But, that's just where I'm at right now. But otherwise, there's still not that much infighting. And what it has done is it's carved out a space where you can say things and do things that you couldn't do anywhere else. And that, I think, is the primary value of the DR at this current iteration and even at its inception, whether you want to date it with Moldbug's NRX in 2007 or the Manosphere Red Pill 2007 or the 2008 coining of the term with Paul Gottfried working along with Richard Spencer starting that movement up, whatever. From 2007, 8-ish till now, but especially under its current iteration, it's carved out that space. Now, what I would say is where I stand, the simplest and easiest way to say that without having to have too many qualifications as to what I actually mean is something from C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity. So we got up on the screen here. Yeah, we do. Okay. So I'm just going to read a little bit from Mere Christianity, and then I'll give some commentary on it. All the same, the New Testament, without going into details, gives us a pretty clear hint of what a fully Christian society would be like. Perhaps it gives us more than we can take. It tells us that there are to be no passengers or parasites. If a man does not work, he ought not to eat. Everyone is to work with his own hands, and what is more, everyone's work is to produce something good. There will be no manufacture of silly luxuries and then of sillier advertisements to persuade us to buy them. And there is to be no swank or side, no putting on airs. To that extent, a Christian society would be what we now call leftist. On the other hand, it is always insisting on obedience and outward marks of respect, and all of us to properly appointed magistrates, from children to parents, and I am afraid this is going to be very unpopular, from wives to husbands. Thirdly, it is a cheerful society full of singing and rejoicing. And regarding worrying or anxiety is wrong. Courtesy is one of the Christian virtues, and the New Testament hates what it calls busybodies. If there was such a society in existence and you and I visited it, I think we should come away with a curious impression. We should feel that its economic life was very socialistic and in that sense advanced, but that its family life and code of manners was rather old-fashioned, perhaps even ceremonious and aristocratic. Each of us would like some bits of it, but I'm afraid very few of us would like the whole thing. This is just what one would expect if Christianity is the total plan for the human machine. We have all departed from that plan and total plan in different ways, and each of us wants to make out that his own modification of the original plan is the plan itself. You will find this again and again about anything that is really Christian. Everyone is attracted by bits of it and wants to pick out those bits and leave the rest. That is why we do not get much further, and that is why people who are fighting for quite opposite things can both say they are fighting for Christianity. Okay, so what that means, what C.S. Lewis is describing there in very general terms is what I would say I am. That is what I want. A New Testament society. And what C.S. Lewis basically said is economically, it's what we would traditionally call left, and socially, it's traditionally what we would call right, which makes it third position. So I would say that I'm a third positionist Christian who wants to have a New Testament society. Now, where does that put me in relationship to the DR? Well, in one regard, it puts me on the margins because the DR has still has this gatekeeping of Protestants in particular and Christians in general. And while there are trad cats and orthobros, they tend to be more NRX. And the Manosphere, which is kind of gone now, and then the Ethno-Nationalists, and specifically the neo-pagans. There's always this Christians are just, crypto Jews. They're just going to betray us eventually. And so they're not going to really be allowed in. A classic example of this was Faith and Heritage and the Rebel Yell. These were both Kinnist, neo-Confederates, Protestant, Presbyterian. They were just gate kept. They weren't allowed, they were just held at arm's length. And so, but they still operated within the umbrella of the DR. So it's sort of like, that's sort of how I contextualize my own position within the DR. I operate in it as this sort of like quasi-independent, person. Now, third positionism is common and prevalent within the DR. We have, Keith Woods, and I think he has a lot of interesting takes. I tend to agree with a lot of his takes on, the environment, on the economics and the nation. But of course, the third position in the DR is often associated with mid-20th century Germans. And, that's not the kind of third position that I'm advocating. So again, third position is itself a big category. And generally today, though, third position groups don't really exist in the left and they don't really exist on the normie right. So in that regard, yeah, probably not going to fit in there too well. So in that case, I think that I'm not, what you would call DR in the sense of lining up nicely with any of these three groups or any of their subgroups, though I have learned a lot from them and have been, well, except NRX. And then, incorporated that into my own thinking. And so, but then again, where else could I do this? Nowhere, right? A kind of like, third positionist, New Testament mere Christianity kind of thing that Lewis is talking about. Where where would I be able to even voice these ideas and find an audience that would be interested in trying to do this? So I don't think you would outside of this. So that's really the interesting element. And I think the other interesting element is now that we're in this new state where all the spurgs and grifters have more or less crashed and burned or been deplatformed, and we have more or less a chastened population left, and fresh faces, a lot of Zoomers. I think that's actually for the best. I think a lot of these bad actors were like older millennials and Gen X. They had quote unquote already made it in life. And so, or even boomers, and they were not really interested in hearing what other people had to say. They just wanted to talk down to them and, find pay pigs. So really, with the influx of Zoomers, they know life's not working out. They know it's going to be rough. They're already black pilled. You don't have to go through I don't know, 10 weeks of boot camp explaining to them, oh guys, it's all over. Here's why. They want answers. It's a totally different game state now. They want answers. And I feel like that you can give them answers. And I feel like I can give them answers. So one example of the example that I'm going to use of how I view myself in this and how I can work and do things within this umbrella is when the Puritans settled in New England, the Native Americans, due to their low level of political development, did not have any sort of regional body that could arbitrate disputes, impose laws and treaties on other people. And so there was a high level of conflict between the Native Americans. When the Puritans showed up, because they had a higher level of political development, they were able to fill the political vacuum of a supranational body. And they could then arbitrate between disputant Indians and create this legal framework under which both Indians and Puritans could interact and Indians v. Indians could interact. And one of the reasons why the Puritan experiment in New England was as successful as it was is because many of the natives fell in lockstep. They're like, well, this is great. We're actually able to solve these disputes and problems without, having to go to war every single time. That doesn't mean there weren't wars. There were two big ones: Pequot War, 1638-39, and the War of King Philip, 1675-76. But because they had a higher level of organization, they were able to fill that void. And there was a demand for that, and those native tribes, accepted that. So what I'm saying is, I'm envisioning myself as playing the role of the Puritans in this context, because many, the DR was, notorious for too many cooks in the kitchen and too many chiefs and not enough Indians, and all the drama and all the sniping and all of these people that just wanted to, boost their own ego. Now, that's not as prevalent now as it was, but they're still just as divided, still just as confused. But now we have a younger generation which is actually interested in finding answers. And so what I would say is that I hope that by producing content that can be used to analyze the problems that we live in the world today, to fill that with instead of a more complex system of political structure, a more complex set of thought to explain what we're dealing with from the highest level all the way down, to fill that gap, and then to attract people to my position, or at least adjacent to my position, because it's just better at filling this need. Because one of the things that the alt-right doesn't have is it doesn't have a unifying theory that everybody can agree to that explains everything. So for those who've watched me talk about simulacra and technique and the machine and all of this, all of the insights that the DR has found can fit within that model. It doesn't negate them or volatilize them. It can be incorporated. But what makes the model that I'm constructing superior is that it actually explains a lot more. It goes all the way up and explains the whole international system in this theoretical way. And so, again, like the Puritans, I hope to be able to go in there, offer this better mode of analysis, which doesn't reject the insights of these other movements, and can then put that into, put that underneath the broader theory. And for me, the two guys at the top right now are Baudrillard with the simulacrum and Ellul with the technique. I think when it comes to the physical issues we're dealing with, those guys are the best. Now, then there's the spiritual element, which, depending on who you talk to on the alt-right, I mean, most Manosphere guys are atheists. There's quite a few Ethno-Nationalists who are atheists. They're not even going to be aware of this. There are some, like I said, neo-pagans. There's some Vedic type people on the white national or ethno-nationalist side, and then the NRX has some orthobros and trad cats and woo-woo mystic types, like not quite Masons, but kind of like perennialist types. So there's that. And what I hope to then do is again overcome that, so that I can also have a highly complex level of spiritual analysis. So working from, because basically I was trained as a philosopher. I went to college, got a degree in philosophy, and so the way I think about a problem was I want to start at the beginning of the causal chain and then work down. Now, in philosophy, that always means God. You always have to start with God, or at least start with the question of God and then work down. But since we're dealing with the material problems, the simulacra and the technique, those are the two most fundamental operating principles in the modern world. And knowing those and then figuring out how they apply to our experiences gives us the insight to know how to act. Because one of the problems that the DR has not yet overcome, and I don't think it ever will if it stays on the current course that it is how to act. One of the things that Baudrillard points out in Simulacra and Simulation is that as the simulacra multiplies, it becomes very difficult to figure out cause and effect, what causes what. He has this little spiel about a terrorist attack in West Germany. He's like, well, was it really a Marxist uprising? Was it really a Marxist attack, or was it a false flag by the government? You don't know. Like you don't know, right? There's all this intermediate processes of the simulation that makes it so hard to know. And Ellul says something very similar with all these complex interconnected systems working together. He says, who's responsible? Who's responsible when something goes wrong? It's really hard to tell. And so, given that we're at the bottom of this structure, just trying to keep our heads above water, it's hard to act because we don't know what we don't even know. Not only is cause and effect muddied, we don't even know what kind of actions we would need to take in order to better ourselves within the simulacra and the world run by technique. But partly because we don't know about the simulacra or technique. Once we know about those things and how the world really works, right? What do they say, right? The Manosphere says they'll tell you how women really work. The Ethno-Nationalists will tell you how, ethnics ethnic people really work. NRX will tell you how power really works. And again, they don't know the first thing about what they're talking about. Unless you look at Baudrillard and Ellul and Illich to understand the current power structure, you don't know what you're talking about. I mean, these guys, and also from the critical angle, John Michael Greer and Joseph Tainter with their idea of collapse, specifically catabolic collapse. These five thinkers, they understand the power structure. They understand how it works, and I've learned so much from them. And I would argue that the unifying principle that could be this unifying intellectual principle, because again, we're not going to get people to give up their cartoon fandoms, as I said 2 weeks ago. They're going to hold on to those. And I'm like, okay, well, just don't shoot, don't punch right then. Is using a sort of synthesis of these five men and others to develop a model to understand from the top down everything that we're experiencing without simultaneously abandoning the insights that some of these groups can teach us. And the other thing too is I've pushed this as well as the sort of like thing we can all agree on, right? Is if you read Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey, if you read Virgil's Aeneid, Dante's The Divine Comedy, and Milton's Paradise Lost, the five great epic literature, epic poems of the Western tradition. What I've said before is there are certain similarities that you find throughout all five. Now, what I take that to mean is that these four authors are looking at the same underlying structure of reality, but are looking at it from different perspectives. Homer and Dante's a Catholic, Milton's a Protestant Puritan, but the point is they're all seeing the same thing. But where a lot of the differences, the differences arise in two ways. One way is they're different belief systems. Two, certain insights take a certain gestation period before they can be fully manifested and developed. So, time you get to Milton is like 2,000 years after Homer. So that's a lot of room for new ideas to gestate. So there's going to be new ideas that Milton is going to give us that you wouldn't be getting from Homer, that you wouldn't be getting from Virgil or Dante. But whatever that is, I guess we call it mere Western civilization, would be the common element that we could all rally around, as well as, as I brought up in the earlier episode, yesterday's episode, the idea of virtue, right? Bringing back the idea of the four virtues, the cardinal virtues, and then for those who are Christian, the three theological virtues, which help us master the Maya so that we can see clearly and be sincere and find our way out. Because ultimately, we're still in the prison, because the prison is your mind. And all of these people, there's nobody, as far as I can tell, there's nobody alive today that remembers what life was like before World War II. The whole post-war prosperity has just completely damaged everybody's senses and positioning. And so you have to look at things that are real. Now, granted, we're living in the belly of the beast, so it's not, we have a hard time finding real things. So we have to find them in books. And, too much movie, all the movies and the video games and the comic books and all of this garbage and trash just creates all of these false impressions, completely, unrepresentative of anything real that humans can live. And that's another reason why the alt-right, the DR fails, is the DR cannot unplug from the machine. It's what Uncle Ted was warning us about. It's like you you can rail against the machine all you want, but if your life depends on the machine operating, you will never take the steps necessary to win, because it will always have that trump card hanging over your head. And that can be in at least two ways. Literal codependence, in the fact that you can't literally physically live without it, but also kind of like psychological codependence. Because let's say that you're maybe a Manosphere guy, and you really like those action movies from the 70s, and you really like, you know, Edgar Rice Burroughs and Robert Howard, and they're, Macho Man heroes. Yeah, but what were they? They were creations from within the simulacra at an earlier iteration when men were still considered needful. And so you're not really going far enough back. To really rebel and resist the simulacra, you have to basically stop thinking with the ideas that it gave you. Because basically, he who plants the ideas is the one who controls you. And the simulacra has planted all these ideas in our head that are just nonsense. And as long as we allow the simulacra to have that trump card over us, we'll never win. It's not possible to win. And that's going to take hard work. You're going to have to read books. You're going to have to be disciplined. You're going to have to, overcome, Maya in order to see clearly. It's just something that these people don't want to do. And that was sort of something that I hinted at in the Cromwell movie review stream. If you just want to have like wine, women, and song and, goof around and be a good old boy, you're going to lose. The Stuarts lost to the Puritans. The Bourbons lost to the revolutionaries. The Romanovs lost to the Bolsheviks. You're going to lose. That's just the way the world works. So you're not playing to win. You're just playing around. So in conclusion, I think that the alt-right at its best produced interesting concepts and ideas. That phase has, I think, mostly ended. Partly, I think, because it's much younger now, demographic-wise. And, I mean, obviously, I'm not knocking on Zoomers, but they don't have as much experience to reflect on, and they haven't read as much in order to have these ideas and connections. So there's that. It also it's carved out of space where you can, say things and do things that would otherwise be impossible anywhere else. And I think that's the main use for the DR at this point. Whereas where I stand, I would say that I like that space that's been carved out. I like being in that space because it allows me to do what I'm doing right here tonight. And no, I'm not technically DR. I'm a third positionist, New Testament, Lewisian Christian from Mere Christianity. That blurb that I read is what I'm for. And thirdly, then, to sort of exploit the opportunities in this space to create a superior analytical model that explains what we see better than the others, while simultaneously preserving the insights that they had and transcending their limitations to build, a sort of like supranational, if you will, like the Puritans did in New England, structure for which something useful can come that could push back against the Maya, the simulacra, and the technique. So let's check out the chats. We have Oro's post for $9.99. Thank you very much. The DR is dialectically stuck in an ideological limbo. It thirsts for action and reasonable steps out of the system, yet can't give up the system's... Man, exactly. Perfectly said. Perfectly said. Here's another super. Oh, here we go. Where are you, Ori? Ori Samsonov for 32 shekels. Thank you for this continued growth of this excellent channel. Well, thank you, Samsonov. Thank you. Now, what do we got here in the chat? Neo Reactionary, hello. Jackson Hawker, hello. Let's see, okay. Vingle, 3 gang checking in. Awesome. Vingle, woe based. I don't know who you're referring to with that woe based, but cool. Jackson Hawker, rip NRX. Yes. Let's see. Minoan, bye NRX. Yeah, definitely. Let's see here. What else do we have? Neo-reactionary. Moldbug dropped the ball bad, though. Yeah. He more than dropped the ball. I think he crapped the bed. Minoan. I've never understood what the DR was. It seems it is anyone on the right who is not a Republican or a Tory proper. Not establishment, I should say. Yeah, I mean that's a use definition. I think that's pretty good. Jacob J. Everyone has their own definition of it, Minoan, and we can't see that changing anytime soon. Vingal, the DR runs the gamut from Radlib to TRS. Yeah. Minoan, Jacob J. I guess that's the whole problem. Yep. Vingal, if there were more stable NS guys around, I wouldn't even associate with y'all. Okay. Well, that's not going to happen, Vingal. They're just going to drink themselves to death. Jacob J. Yes, I'd say it's a major problem. Not hurry up. It's going to be too late, but still a problem nonetheless. Minoan, what is NS and why are they better than us? Mid-20th century Germans. Vingal, I'm mostly joking, BTW. I like you. I should hope so. Euro post. I'm okay. Yeah, back catching up. Cool. Let's see. Jacob J. No. We know what you mean, Vingal. We get it. No, just joking low. All right, let's see. Here, this is good. Vingal, there's hardly one single camp in which I feel most connected. It's some of this and some of that, as implied above. I like everything from Radlib to TRS, but I obviously can't agree with everyone. Yeah, I mean that's a pretty fair summation. Vingal, for instance, I listen to AA stuff even though I don't hate Irish people. Euthanasia, hello. Oro's post. I thought about doing a stream like this week. Think I will when I get back from being out of town. Well, you should. The more of us that talk about this Oro's post, hopefully we can create, a pressure for this to happen. Let's see. Too late, Vingal. I'm nervous about Todd reading out my nonsense chats later. Too late. Let's see. Let's see here. Neo-reactionary. NRX stands on... Yeah, it does. Stewie watch. Yeah, that's probably because Moldbug did that whole Lord of the Rings themed post. Manoan, Vingal, and Oro all talking about the AA problem. Well, I like AA. I mean, again, like I said, I think there are some things he could work on, but he's generally been decent to me. Yeah, Jacob J. Sometimes there's one group that spurgs out over AA. Sometimes it's been over Keith. Other times it's spurging over Christians. Yeah, that's just nonsense. That's why I'm... Afa Jabaka. Todd, are you a griper? No. Though Nick is pretty based and no e-girls ever, so... Fun, smart, and Manoan 42. A little Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy humor there. Nice. Let's see. At Oro's post had a stream on a Llewellyn technique. Yeah, you should. Yeah, everybody should go watch that Oro's post on technique. And you should also watch Chad Hogg. He's also really good too on this question. Youth in Asia recommended book list, maybe. Well, you know what? That's actually a really good idea. I'll have to put something together, but a reading list. Yeah, that's a good idea. I like that. HCBJ, enjoyed your talk. Any good books on Native American history or Napoleon that you could recommend? It's obvious you're very knowledgeable about many parts of history. Well, thank you. A lot of the works about Native Americans are going to be better if you get them before 1970, because you get all this like Days of the Wolves nonsense. That's just infantilizing and puerile. I mean, these warrior traditions would just balk at the idea of what they are taught to be. It's ridiculous. Well, it's not really a book on Napoleon, but there's a section on Carlyle's On Heroes about Napoleon. You might want to read that. Carlyle's always worth a read. Let's see. Oro's post. I think there's also just a general issue of extended adolescence these days, and a lot of the DR has the cuz they're brainy internet dudes. Yep. King Salmonfish. Neo reacting to neolibs to get you a neolib GF. Yeah. K14, Y29. The DR needs to widen its bibliography. The whole Evola thing is contaminating it all. It's all my Evola, Muganon, my Spengler, one-dimensionalism. I tried to read it a little back in the day, or I tried to read Ride the Tiger. It just sounded like pretentious nonsense. I mean, it was really rough. I never read Guénon. Spengler is a serious intellectual and scholar. I would put him on par with Ellul and Baudrillard. He's writing about different questions, but I'd still have him. M. Moldbug's LOTR post was one of his biggest brand disasters I can remember in recent internet history. Yeah, I didn't read it, but yeah, the reaction was bad. M. No e-girls ever is correct. Yes, it is. Oh, here we go. I'll read a good one of yours, Bingle. Wrecked Narnia, 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 Narnia. There you go. Yes, exactly. I think I was talking to Keith Preston or messaging him privately on Facebook a little bit earlier in last week. And he said that, his Pan-Anarchist Federation has room for a Narnia stand, of which I'll be the leader. So I thought, yeah, that works. That works. New Year reactionary reading list stream to cure me videos. I will, guys. I will get a reading list, and I'll go through the list and why they're important and the big ideas and why you should read them. It's actually a very good idea. Man, which Baudrillard book to read first? Well, the first one I read was Simulacra and Simulation. I've not read any of his others. I do want to, though. So that's something. But yeah, start with Simulacra and Simulation. Oro's post. Evola was just the angry Substack poster of his day. Harsh, but not wrong. Cyberpunk International Affairs. My Evola Wojak crying about America. Jackson Hawker for $10. Thank you for your research. Thanks for the stream. You're welcome. And lastly, Minoan, the Trooper. Very cool stream, Todd. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. Thanks for the idea for a reading list. Jackson Hawker? No. Yeah, Jackson Hawker and I want to say M. But if I got that wrong, thanks for that. Yeah, Spinley. I'll talk to you later. See you, Euthanasia. See you, K14Y29. Vingle. Oro's post. Jacob J. HCBJ. Cyberpunk International Affairs. Talk to you later, guys.